It's been a little while since I had some repair videos up. I do have some things to take care of for my sister while I'm here, so it's a bunch of small projects. I will have to make a trip to Home Depot at some point to grab some of the stuff that I need, but for now, while the ladies are gone, I will be replacing this light fixture. So I'm gonna go find the breaker and take that down and put a new one in. The old light fixture is already down. That's they're usually just a 3-wire, a black, a white, and a ground. This one just had a center nut that held the whole fixture in place. So unscrew that, the whole thing comes down, and then disconnect each one of these wires, and that takes the old one out. And this new fixture mounts differently than the old fixture. So next thing I'm gonna do is take this bracket out and install the bracket that came with the new fixture. Bracket's mounted. I just reused these screws here that came with the old bracket because that just lines up perfectly. All these different notches here are because of different style boxes, that junction boxes that the light fixtures will mount to. So you have multiple options here of where to line things up to get it to where you want it. But bracket is in, and now we're just going to take the new fixture and wire these up. These got a little twisted. I had to fish these wires through this extension tube here. And then these little holes on the bottom side just line up with these screws. And I had to adjust those heights too, so they didn't stick down too far through the base, so that the cover nuts, here are the finish nuts that make it look nice, you know, pull it in nice and tight. All right, that's all wired up. I just pushed that ground connection up inside there. So once these wire nuts are twisted tight, just give these wires a tug to make sure they're not loose, and then stuff the wire nuts up in that hole. And then this extra slack will just hide inside of this space here, inside the base of the new light fixture. And then line up the holes and put your nuts on, and it's good to go. All right, just tightening up this last screw, and that's in. Now there is the old ring of the old fixtures. That's something to look for. If you get a new fixture, you can either look for one that has a base bigger than the old one to cover this, or you know, you got a little bit of touch-up painting to do. Maybe a magic eraser will take that off. But there's also a rough edge where the old light, where the junction box is, and no matter where I placed this, a little bit was exposed. So they do make little sealing circles, I forget what they're called, but they're like a little round decorative thing that will cover stuff like this. So I do have to run to Home Depot to get some other things for stuff that I'm working on here. So I'll find a little round decorative disc that will actually cover that rough stuff and the diameter of the old fixture, so we won't have to do any painting. And they usually come white already, either primed, and you can paint them whatever color you want, but they'll already be white. So the ceiling's white, we won't have to even paint it. It'll just mount underneath this here and cover all of that, and it'll be a little nice decorative thing. All right, I'm completely finished with this light fixture. I grabbed one of these ceiling discs from Home Depot, took the light back down, put that up in first, and then mounted the base right up through the center hole of that. So that cleaned it up nicely, and I got bulbs in it. So we're good to go. Next up is a toilet tank rebuild. I don't know what the original problem was with this, but my sister did replace some of the plumbing. So instead of a flapper, there's this tubular looking piece, and it connects with the flusher here, and the fill tower looks new. So everything was kind of upgraded without replacing, you know, removing the tank. But now this piece gets stuck, so the toilet keeps running. So similar problems like with when flappers get old, or things get hung up because they're worn out, the toilet tank keeps running because the flapper or this piece stays up and doesn't make a good seal. So I got a complete rebuild kit that will replace everything in there, but you do have to remove the tank to put this in because there'll be a new seal here. It is a flapper style, but I've used these in the past and they've worked great. So you don't even have to cut any tubing. This is a self-adjusting. You just loosen this nut here, and that adjusts to whatever the water level you need in there in the tank. So first thing I'm gonna do is shut the water feed off. So whatever style valve This was just a quarter turn to turn it off. And then flush the toilet, which I already did, so that drains down as much as water as possible in that tank before we start loosening things up. Next, you want to loosen this nut here, disconnect the feed line, and they're usually hand tight because there's not a whole lot of water pressure in a toilet system. So it looks like somebody put some plumber's putty on there also, which is fine, that's flexible. But there's usually a gasket in this nut that makes a seal, so you do not have to use a putty. But there's going to be a little bit of water. Sometimes that dribbles out, so you either want a towel, or I usually use the toilet lid if there's room to catch the water, and then I just dump that out. But that's there you go. There's the little dribble. The new plumbing will usually have a new seal, so. Next, you want to loosen these bolts here. There's one on either side that holds the tank to the bowl, and they're usually 1/2 inch. I have had some that are different size than that, but deep well 1/2 inch socket will do. All right, those 2 bolts. If you look down at the tank, the heads of the bolts are always the rusty looking heads, and there are gaskets in around those heads, so it's keeping the water from dripping out. But once you lift this tank, the little bit of water that's in there could start seeping out of any of these holes. So you'll want to keep your sink area clear. This is just a powder room, so just have a toilet and a sink in here. If you're in a bathroom that has a shower or a tub that's closer to the toilet, that's what you'll want to use. But you want to dump that water out quickly as soon as you lift that tank, or else most of it's going to go on the floor. All right, that's removed and dumped in the sink, so no more water in there. The next thing we're gonna do is take this seal off, and there's a big nut on this holding that piece in, and take this nut off, and that'll take the fill tower out. I work on this on the toilet seat, but I always put a towel down to catch drips and to keep from scuffing the seat and whatnot. So you can see this, probably original. I think it's a 12-year-old home. I don't see any cracks, so this probably would have lasted quite a while longer. But with the rebuild kits, they're only like $20, $22 from the big box store. So if you have a flapper that's not working, you can replace just the flapper, but for a cheap amount and a little bit of work, you can replace all of the plumbing, and everything will last that much longer. This nut is off, and I disconnected this hose from the fill tower, so that still has the float on it, but you basically just pull on that, and the fill tower and float comes out, and that gets set aside. All right, that nut is loosened. I'm basically just using these 10-inch channel locks here to take both off. This just opens big enough to reach around that. And this is a standard size nut. I know some newer toilets have even larger openings for more flushing efficiency, but for what I'm doing, a 10-inch channel locks works to take this apart. And once that nut is off, this whole piece comes out of the tank. The only thing I had to do, because this is usually there's a chain or something connected to the flapper. This device here works with like a little cable system. So you just push that and it disconnects it from the flushing handle. And then the only thing left is taking this flusher handle off, because we'll be installing an original style one with just a rod. But these nuts here are reverse thread, and that's standard for any toilet. So it's righty loosey to undo this, lefty tighty. And then you want to open up your rebuild kit and pull out this piece, and then you want to unthread this nut here, and this piece, this threaded piece, will go through that hole, and you want this positioned, this tower positioned in the back, so the flapper's facing forward. I have that in. So this tank is face down. So flappers face forward, tank or the tube is to the back. And I just hand tighten it for now. I'll tighten everything with the wrench in a minute. Next thing you want out of the kit is the fill tower, which already has the seal mounted on it, and then this nut is in a separate bag. The fill tower is installed, and again, that one I just put kind of on an angle from the corner of the tank, just to give it the most clearance, and then that nut just tightens that in place. Again, that's all just hand tight. I'll tighten out with the wrench. All right, they're both snugged up, and you do want to hold the components in the tank while you're snugging these up, because they can spin as you're trying to tighten this stuff, and then they'll be out of whack inside the tank. So just stick one hand in the tank, hold the component while you're tightening this with a wrench to keep things straight. Next, you put this seal. The new seal fits pretty snug on this nut. So you want it to fit all the way tight on. So just keep pushing it and working it on all the way. And that's how that's supposed to look. Next thing we're gonna do is fit this tank back on there. So this seal here just has to fit centered, seated properly right in that circle there. And those holes down there are already lined up, so we will drop in our tank bolts. And these seals here in the pack with the bolts, they're just a rubber washer. And now we just put the washers and nuts on the other ends of these bolts and snug them up. And you want to snug these bolts up, alternating either side back and forth, to close this gap here. So you want your tank to touch these rubber stops. There's one in the back, two in the front. Some toilets do not have these, depends on the toilet design, but you may not have any stop, and your porcelain tank will butt up against your bowl. But you don't want to over tighten, because you can crack your porcelain very easily. So you just want to snug them up enough to touch these stops, or porcelain to porcelain, and without any tank movement. All right, they are snugged up, and just give it the wiggle test and nothing moves. So that is good and tight. Next thing we'll do is thread this tube on. So that is the seal for that, and just start threading till it's tight. And like I said before, this tube here is self-adjusting. A lot of kits are the old-fashioned toilets. It was a fixed pipe. So this, you just loosen this nut here, and this top piece slides up and down to get your exact measurement. So that's cool, saves a ton of time. So what I usually do is the little hose mount will fit on that flat edge here, and I'll just spin that facing the opposite side of your fill tower to give the hose enough time, room to mount onto here to the clip and not have a whole lot of slack bunched up. So, and then you just tighten this. So you want your height wherever your water height is. We'll have to adjust it because this is going to use less water too now. So the new water level height, you can probably lower that about there. And we'll try that first. So out of that kit, you want to get this little clip and this hose. This clip mounts on the flat spot at the top of that hose, just like that. So it angles the hose down in there. And then one end of the hose mounts onto that, and the other one onto there. And that's what it looks like. So you want a continuous loop. You don't want any creases or anything in this hose to restrict water flow. So depending on your toilet type, or where you position things, you can just adjust this, mount this clip to wherever you want, any position you want. But most toilets I've found, that's the perfect position. And it doesn't stick up higher than the lid, so the lid will fit on perfect. And I still need to grab the new handle to finish the installation. So this chain will just hook onto the end of the handle. But for now, I'm gonna turn the water on and I can test it just by pulling that chain. So water on. And what you want to check for leaks for at this connection here, you want to check for water. And sometimes working this valve or shutting water off, you may get some seepage around this fitting even though you didn't touch it. So you do want to check that. And a little trick for that is to just fold a piece of dry paper towel, stick it on the floor, and you'll be able to see if there's any type of dripping going on down here. And then you also want to look for leakage at where the tank bolts to the bowl. All right, I've got my TP underneath my drip points here, so if there's any drippage from this valve or this connection, I'll see it right on this paper, and then over here I've got it underneath where that bolt is. So if anything should start seeping, I'm gonna see it right away. This finished filling already, and we're gonna do a test flush. So you can see now too how much less water is being used, so it's a more efficient setup. Here's where your old water line is, and it cuts the water usage about 1/3 of what it was. So your new water level stops here with this system, and that's where your old water line was. So we're using less water each flush. All right, I got the handle and lever, and this toilet has a side mount lever, which is not normal. Usually they're in the front, so I got one of these universal ones that fits all tank positions, called a strong arm, and that has 2 adjustable positions here. So this allows you to pivot the arm up and down, and this joint here lets you pivot it side to side, so you can adjust it perfectly to where you want it to lift your flapper. So this one is installed and good to go. And I had already checked the dry towel that I put over there, and there was no drips. So it's been a couple hours actually since I did the install, and nothing was leaking. So this job is done. Next up is replacing the ceiling fan. The motor is stuck on one setting, so it looked like it was only stuck on low, so it lost all the other settings. You can hear it humming when you pull the chain, like it's bumping up in higher settings, but it only spins low. So we're gonna switch this ceiling fan out. One thing about ceiling fans when you're working on them by yourself is they're pretty heavy, especially when you have an extension piece like this hanging down. So I took apart the light fixture already, loosened these 3 screws here, and then turned that, and that drops down the light fixture, and it can just be unplugged. So it takes the whole light fixture off to save some weight. And next thing I'm gonna do is take each of these blades off to save some more weight before I even work up top there and take the wiring apart so I can get everything down and then start assembling the new one. All right, I got all the blades off, as you can see, so now it's easier to handle with one person. So here's that cover piece. You just loosen these 2 screws, and then it turns, and just slide that down to the bottom here. But there's all your wiring, so this one's fairly easy to get to everything. You just pull all these out, take the connections apart, just like we did that light fixture a little bit ago, and then take these screws off, and this whole thing will come down. Most ceiling fans have 4 wires. So you got green, white, blue, and black. Unlike just simple light fixtures, just having black, white, and green, ceiling fans have a blue wire. So I did look at the new fixture, and luckily that just has the same amount too. So in the instructions, it does explain that there could be more wires than even this, and it does give you instructions on what to do with those extra wires. But I lucked out, and there is not extra wires for me to deal with. I encountered our first problem. The old down rod will not work with the new fan. So the diameter of this old down rod is different than that new ceiling fixture where the receiver is for this to thread into. It doesn't match up. So I got to find the Hunter down rod that matches this brand so that we can get it to work. But ultimately, if I would have customized this to get it to work, which I could have, I think there would have been some rattling or tapping possibly, because it wouldn't have been 100% tight the way that the manufacturer suggests mounting it. I know that it wouldn't have fallen from the ceiling while it was running, so it was safe, but I couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be any rattling or tapping. So I'm just gonna flush mount that fan and then hope that I can find a Hunter down rod. If not, it'll be flush mounted, so at least it can be used. I got all the wiring done and then attached this cover piece here, but I did cut the wire because it was so long. I know that we're not gonna be getting a down rod that long, so I did trim the wiring so there's not a lot stuffed in around this cover because it's just sitting up in there, all of the extra, but it all worked out. And now if we do want to get a down rod, there's plenty of wire to run through it and extend this down like the old one was. But that's all buttoned up and cleaned up, and now I'm gonna install the blades. So that original fan I put in was a nightmare because once I attached the blade, part of them rubbed against the housing, so it wouldn't actually let the motor spin the way it was designed. It was from the factory, machined holes through the blades, so it could only be positioned in one specific spot, 3 bolts per blade, so there was no wiggle room at all. So I could have customized it, drilled the holes bigger, or filed the edge of the blade down, whatever, but ultimately processed a return for that. And ran to Home Depot and got this one. And it was the last one, but it looks really nice. Nicer than the last one, and it was actually cheaper. This one went together easily, and it is fully remote operated, so the light has its own controls on the remote for dimming and changing the tone. It is an LED fixture, so there's no bulb to change. And the fan has its own controls on the remote. There's actually a setting called a breeze setting where you can push that button and it automatically fluctuates the speed of the fan to mimic like an actual breeze outside. So pretty cool settings. So yeah, sometimes DIY projects don't go as planned and you've got to pivot and adjust and not get so angry. But took that old fan down completely, put this one up, and this one's working perfect. And the old fan there was no remote controls for the old fan, so there was one switch here for the fan and one dimmer switch for the light. And this fan, the only thing that it cannot do is work with a dimmer switch because there's already dimmer features on the remote. You have to wire in the remote receiver, and a dimmer switch does not work with that remote receiver. So it's just a simple on-off switch here you turn the entire unit on, and then the remote, you can control the light and the fan separately. So the fan my sister ended up going with was a Hampton Bay Finelli Smart 54-inch LED indoor color changing ceiling fan. Neat stuff. And here's a little quick repair I did. These sash locks, the levers were broken off of the sash locks on this window. So again, I just ran to Home Depot and grabbed sash locks that were the same size. You just have to make sure the measurement is the same here, your bolt pattern. But all I had was white. So I did have some brown spray paint because another little project I did was paint these light fixtures here. So I just taped off around these fixtures and Rust-Oleum dark brown spray paint and hit these light fixtures. There was 3 total right there because they were all faded, a little rusty. And then I hit the header here with some spray paint and caulked the edges to clean that up too. I took that same brown spray paint and painted these latches and replaced them so she can have secured windows. So that wraps up some minor home repairs. You want to shut off the power when you're working with electricity, shut off the breakers for whatever you're working on. Don't always rely on the light switch. You know, if you're not comfortable working with electricity, obviously hire a professional electrician. When you're working on toilets, if you're not comfortable, obviously hire a plumber. That wraps up our fan changes, light fixtures, toilet repairs. And remember, time is everything, money is a tool, and we can't afford to waste either one. Last tag.